Parents, the following program is intended for people over the age of 13. If your kids are younger than that, please use the YouTube Kids app.
Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Peter Bernard's Scary Stories for Adults.
Welcome to the... What was that? Welcome to the Scary Stories Valentine's Day special. I'll be your hostess, Madeline Starr. We've got a collection of romantic and wintry Dogman stories, and I'll be presenting them to you from here in Dogman Swamp. I have to be honest. When I first agreed to host this special, I thought we would shoot it in front of a green screen. But no. They drove me into the middle of the swamp, set up a robot camera, and drove off. There truly is no business like show business. This was not how I was planning on spending my birthday either. Speaking of birthdays, this first story is about a party. A Valentine's Day party. A party that got interrupted by the Dogman. What was that sound?
The Valentine's Day Party Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I once had an unpleasant experience with an actual, real-life Dogman, and it happened on Valentine's Day or Valentine's Night. I don't blame him, but he contributed to a pretty humiliating evening for me. The reason I no longer blame him is that I've grown old enough to make a fool of myself on Valentine's Day without the help of Dogman or any other mythological cryptid. But this was my first and my most terrifying Valentine. This girl had invited me and my friends to her Valentine's Day party and gave us each a printed invitation. She really wanted to get Rod to come. He was the good-looking one in our group. But I most wanted to go because I had a crush on that girl. Let's call her Rhonda. Rod was not interested in Rhonda, but she was interested in him. I was hoping that if I made a good impression at her party, that I might change her mind and get her interested in me instead. I was a nerdy klutz. I had no chance, but since I was a late bloomer and had never felt strongly about a girl before, I really had no perspective. I had no prior failures or successes to compare to, so I would have no way of knowing if I had a chance with that girl. I had seen nerds in movies succeed with cool girls, so I decided to give it my all. I did myself up as much as I could before the event, wearing my closest to nice clothes, and I rode my bike to the flower shop in town to get her a bouquet of something. I don't remember what it was. Maybe carnations. It wasn't roses, I know that. I couldn't afford those. From there, I remember biking to her parents' house over on the richer side of town with her flowers in my basket in front. I took a shortcut through the woods, which was a path I had taken one prior occasion years earlier. It was an easy, quick, flat dirt path, same as before, but this time, as I approached, I realized that I had only been there before in the daytime. While it looked charming when the sun was up, it appeared ominous and frightening at night, like a dark hole leading inside a cave. I paused a second to gather my courage, then rode my bike into the deep darkness. After a while of pedaling in the dark, listening to the insects all around me in quadraphonic surround sound, I began to feel a little claustrophobic and hemmed in. The air itself felt thick and hard to move through, almost like I was biking through dark jello. There was a sudden crack of thunder and lightning that was so loud and so unexpected, I fell off my bike onto the pathway. Before I was even up and brushing the dust off of myself, I could hear the skies open overhead and begin dousing the tops of the trees. I knew that rain would eventually come down through the tree cover and drench me, so I got back on my bike and started riding as fast as I could ride. It was very dark in there, and soon the path started getting muddy and slippery. Rather than slowing down as a sane person might have done, I panicked and tried to go as fast as I could, thinking that the sooner I was out of those woods the better. Something darted out onto the pathway in front of me. I swerved left to avoid it and went head-on into a very wide tree. I splashed into the mud, landing on my right side with the bike on top of me. I wasn't hurt, but I wasn't sure yet what state my bike might have been in. I looked around, trying to figure out what had run out in front of my bike. It was something really big, but I didn't think it was a guy. I literally couldn't think of any animal that was as large as a man that would be living in our town, so I wondered if it were a guy wearing a mask or a costume or something. I wanted a second look to know what it had been, but at the same time, I was afraid of what I might see. So, I was looking around, but I was also hoping I wouldn't see anything, if that makes sense. I heard a terrible sound, just the most awful sound I ever heard, and I got up, and I ran toward it. I don't think I would do that now, but that was what I did back then. I ran across the muddy path and into the muddy woods, rain pouring down all around me. There, in a clearing between bushes, a very large dog had captured an owl. I was struck by the odd scene. I thought owls were birds of prey. I never heard of something else hunting them. The idea flashed through my head that the dog was rabid or insane in some way. It couldn't have been what I saw anyway, I figured, since what had run out on the path causing me to crash was an upright walking bipedal thing. I backed away through the bushes, deciding to leave the dog and his odd prey alone. The sound I made in retreat gave me away, though, and that dog spun his entire upper body around in a flash so that he was now staring at me, eyes completely dilated and reflecting back light in the darkness, lips curled back angrily, showing off a set of mangled teeth as long as daggers, gore oozing from his lower jaw. That was the scariest, freakiest dog I had ever seen. Then, in less than a second, well before I could react to what I had just seen, the dog spun around and rose up to a much greater height. I realized I was staring at his chest and belly, and that he had stood up in the way a man would have. This was an upright, walking, bipedal dog, and on its hind legs. It was now far taller than I was. I ran back to my bike and tried to get it to work, but the front wheel was now all bent out of shape. I grabbed the flowers and I tore off through the woods, slipping and falling on my face in the mud more than once. When I would look back, I would always see the Dogman, who was pursuing me, but at his own leisure. He didn't seem that interested in catching me, but he liked the idea of scaring me enough that I would keep running. By the time I emerged from those woods, I was a complete mess. I decided I should skip the party, but I felt bad about not giving Rhonda her flowers. The entrance to her family's estate was only a block away from where the path exits the forest, so I decided to walk over, ring the bell, leave the flowers with the butler or maid or whatever, then walk the long walk home. The best move I had left remaining to me, I felt, was to get the flowers to her without her seeing what a mess I had made of myself. So I rang her doorbell and was really embarrassed when she opened the door herself. She looked stunned when she saw me. Her jaw dropped to the floor. A bunch of guys and girls I knew all ran to the front door, pointing at me and laughing. I told Rhonda the flowers were for her, but someone else grabbed them and they got passed around and made fun of. At some point, Rhonda's father came to the front door to see what the fuss was, and he gave me a pitying look. Her dad told me to get in his car, and he was going to drive me home. He was a nice guy. He even warned me to avoid his daughter. He said she would chew a nice guy like me up and spit me out. He told me to date girls based on mutual interests, and if they treated me nicely, not based on what they looked like. I remember laughing at him because his wife was a model when she was younger. He told me, "Do as I say, not as I do," and we both laughed. Just then, I swear, that same Dogman ran right across the road we were driving on. It was further down. It didn't cause an accident or anything, but it happened. I saw it, and Rhonda's father saw it too because he let out a long string of expletives in reaction to the event. The entire thing must have lasted 3 seconds, maybe? It just ran out of the woods on its hind legs, across the highway and maybe 2 or 3 running steps, then out of sight in the woods on the other side. Rhonda's father was convinced we had seen Bigfoot, but I knew better. He wondered aloud what the creature had been chasing, that it would take a risk like that. It was probably trying to catch an owl, I told him. He looked at me and said, "You're a weird kid," and we were both silent for the rest of the way home. This all happened many, many years ago, and in all that time, I've never seen the Dogman or anything strange ever again. I've never seen a ghost. I've never seen a UFO. Nothing. But on that one night, for some reason I don't expect to ever understand, I got not 1, but 2 visits from the Valentine's Day party Dogman.
Phew! That was a lot scarier than I expected. It's getting kind of chilly here in Dogman Swamp, so let's jump right into our second story, which we call
The Valentine's Anniversary Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, this is a story about me and my wife and the time we were terrorized by the Dogman. Deirdre and I were married on Valentine's Day, and for our 9th anniversary, she asked me if we could go camping. She had been on a health kick. Camping never would have been something she'd asked me for before that, especially not camping in the snow. I said, "Why not?" And off we went. Now, I don't mean she wanted me to buy a trailer or rent a cabin or anything. I mean, she just wanted to get a tent and go camping in the snow. She was saying stuff about how it would be romantic if we had to use our body heat to keep warm. This was the same woman who would freak out if I set the heat 2 degrees lower than what she thought it should be. I was expecting this to all blow up, and I was thinking of backup plans in case it did. I just never expected it to blow up in quite the way it managed to. The night before Valentine's, we were sitting out in the cold, all bundled up around our campfire in the middle of nowhere, and we were roasting marshmallows. Deirdre wanted me to tell her scary stories, but it was hard because I was stuttering. It was just that cold. The fire wasn't making me warm, and I was whining that we should have gotten out of there before it got dark and cold. And then I noticed someone in the tree line watching us. I pointed this out to Deirdre quietly. I told her not to say anything, but we were being watched. I indicated the direction he was standing in, but told her to be discreet about looking over there. Instead, she stood up, turned around, squinted in that direction, and started shouting angrily, "Hey, stop staring at us, you perv!" I unzipped the tent and urged my wife to get inside. She said something about how we should put out the campfire, and I told her to leave it alone and just get in the tent. I must have sounded urgent or something because she actually did as I asked, and soon we were both back inside. Deirdre angrily asked me why I had taken the stranger's side over hers. I asked her what kind of person stands out in the middle of nowhere in the snow, staring at strangers. she said. I don't know, some maniac. Yeah, exactly. She thought about it. Well, what are we going to do, hide out from him all weekend, she asked me. I don't know, I answered. I'm not the one who thought it would be romantic to be out in the middle of nowhere with maniacs stalking us. Oh, fine, so blame me, she exclaimed. And soon, we were in the middle of a shouting match. Deirdre got so angry at me that she unzipped the tent and walked out. Immediately, she was met by rapid-fire dog barking, loud and in her face. I looked out of the tent, and I saw something I still can't believe when I think back on it. I saw my wife looking up above her to the head of a giant dog that was standing on its hind legs, its front arms held out menacingly, barking fiercely and sharply and loudly at her. Deirdre fell backward on top of me, and we both tumbled back into the tent. I climbed out from under her, intent on zipping us back up, but that immense dog head was inside the tent, attempting to chew and digest us, I would imagine. The dog head was so large that I literally rode the top of it, and my wife rode the jaw. We held on to any part of that face that wasn't the teeth, and we managed to avoid getting mashed in that manner. The dogman couldn't get his arms into the tent. His head was of such a size, so it was the two of us against the massive dog head. Eventually, the creature had enough, and it withdrew quickly from the tent, leaving the two of us inside, wet and exhausted, a bit bruised and torn up, but alive. This time, I got the tent closed before the creature could reach back in. Outside, we could hear the thing throw a massive temper tantrum, barking and growling and running into the tent from various angles. We were both wet, as was the entire interior of the tent, including any other clothing we might have changed into. We literally had to hug each other to keep warm enough to survive, and it was extremely uncomfortable all night. Yet, there was no place to go, because that dogman was constantly making us aware that he was not done with us, that he was still outside, just waiting for one of us to be dumb enough to stick our head out. As the sun rose, we didn't hear the dog any longer, so we got outside, built up our fire, and began drying off some clothes to wear for the walk back to our car. Neither of us had gotten any sleep at all, and we were both sneezing and showing other signs that we were beginning to come down with some kind of cold or flu. It could have been worse. It could have been frostbite. We might not have survived the night. I was trying to stay on the bright side, but Deirdre kept interpreting each one of my statements as some kind of mockery of her or a judgment against her. When we finally got to the car and were able to sit in heat for a while, our arguing became even more miserable. We spent Valentine's Day sneezing and bickering the entire way on the car ride home. The heat made it hard for me to stay awake, but Deirdre refused to take a turn driving since she had just been through a traumatic night the night before. She had just been attacked by a dog-headed monster. I guess she forgot that the same thing had happened to me at the same time it happened to her. We fought for a month or two after that, but eventually got over it. When she suggests any sort of winter vacation these days, I say no unless it means we're flying down to some warmer climate. I never want to spend another vacation in the snow, and cold? Cold is not romantic. I learned these lessons the hard way from the Valentine's anniversary. Dogman.
Don't go away. We've got more Valentine's Day Dogman stories coming up right now.
Vermont, Valentine's Day Dogman sighting. Dear Scary Stories NYC, this is a story of my wife and me running into a conflict with a dog-headed bipedal creature in Vermont that we can only assume must have been the North American upright walking canid. It was a weekend that started off romantically, then descended into terror, and narrowly avoided ending in tragedy. We rented a cabin in a remote part of Vermont, and we were quite happy. This was our third time renting that one specific cabin, and we had always enjoyed ourselves thoroughly before. There's usually a lot of privacy, but we're not far from the central office in case something goes wrong. The cabin has an outdoor sauna, so you can sit out in the cold while in the hot water. It's quite invigorating, I must say, and we were out there one evening when my wife, let's call her Mandy, told me that she saw a man walking at the edge of the wood line. I looked. I couldn't see what she was seeing, though, and I shrugged it off. Okay, so in the third time we were out there, we finally saw one person off in the distance. We still were mostly getting a lot of privacy, and it didn't seem like a very big deal to me. Mandy felt otherwise. She insisted she didn't feel safe out there any longer, and she asked me to please humor her and go back inside right away. I could tell Mandy was shaken up, and so even though I didn't really understand why, I figured I'd better go back inside with her. The rest of the night, she was kind of elusive and kept to herself. We ended up watching a movie together, and she fell asleep in my arms. I carried her to bed, wondering what it was that she saw which had ruined our evening. I would find out for myself the next night. It was getting to be time for dinner, but we had both overeaten at lunch, and Mandy suggested to me that we go for a walk out in the snow to build up an appetite. I agreed right away since I was happy to see her acting like herself again. As we started walking through the virgin snow toward the tree line, however, I could feel her beginning to tense up and become less comfortable. I wanted to ask her what was wrong, but I thought it might be better for me to downplay it and not make her feel worse. Suddenly, she stopped walking and pointed ahead. "There," she said, wide-eyed, staring ahead with a horrified expression on her face. I looked where she was pointing, and there it was. Something that was not a man. I caught a scream in my throat before it could come out, but what I was seeing was utterly horrific. I've heard stories on your channel and others about people seeing the Dogman, and they always talk about what a magnificent animal it was. Well, the thing I was looking at was messed up. It was hideous. It was beaten up, scarred, cut up, misshapen. It was a nightmare. This thing was covered in fur that stuck out in all different directions and had patches of it missing where ugly scars looked like they might be becoming infected. This thing was also sickly looking, and yet it was so tall as it stood there bipedally that I don't think 4 athletic men could have taken it in a fair fight. Even an ill member of this species was superior to the healthiest of our own, so it should be the top of the food chain. It should rule the planet. And yet, this was something that wasn't supposed to even exist. Something so rare that we should have viewed ourselves as privileged just for getting to glimpse it. Then, the creature caught my eyes with its glowing orbs, and I felt a sickening feeling in my stomach. The creature began charging us like a 2-legged bull, running through the snow with a look of complete hatred on its hideous, deformed face. As sick as that thing was, we instantly knew it could outrun either or both of us. Running back to the cabin, I made it back first and threw the door open, then ran back to my wife. The creature was closing in on her, and I needed to give her a chance to get inside. I grabbed a branch I saw laying on the ground and nearly pulled my back out as I discovered it was a root, not a branch, and that it was not going anywhere. My wife ran past me, and the creature was upon me. I swung hard at the immense, sickly Dogman's jaw, but I missed by a mile. I couldn't reach up far enough to hit it. I had caused it to step back, though, and I took the chance to run inside, passing my wife once again in the process. As she entered the cabin, I stood at the door, ready to slam it and lock us both in safely. One of her feet landed on the wooden floor. When the next landed, I would close the door and we'd finally be safe. That second foot never landed. The Dogman grabbed it from behind and pulled her back out of the cabin. Mandy's face was in the snow. She was being dragged along, her arms and legs flailing as wildly as she could flail them. The Dogman seemed undisturbed by her protestations and began meandering away, her ankle in one hand. I ran after the monster with a poker I had grabbed from the fireplace. I swung at his hand, holding my wife, and was able to sting him enough to get him to release his grip. Then I swung wildly for his head, aiming for his eyes for whatever reason. Instinct, I guess. The Dogman started growling and barking at me, and I thought I was going to have a heart attack right on the spot and pass out. It was the scariest face I ever looked into, and the most frightening thing I ever had to do. He and I were holding each other off, neither of us really landing a solid hit on the other. I tried to match his ferocity and fury, and he seemed surprised by the extent to which I was willing to go to defend Mandy. Eventually, he backed off, probably figuring it just wasn't worth the fight for the amount of meat on her bones. I went inside and got very sick in the bathroom for quite some time afterward. I was traumatized for months after that, but I think I'm over it now. I never went to see anyone about it, but we both just cut each other some slack for some time after that particular Valentine's Day weekend. We both knew what the other had been through, and so we both just hung tight and nursed each other back to better emotional health. We still celebrate Valentine's Day, but man, we celebrate it indoors. Las Vegas, New York, places like that. We don't ever go out to the country anymore when we want to relax. And that's a lesson taught to us by the Vermont Valentine's Day Dogman.
Don't go away. We've got more Valentine's Day Dogman stories coming up right after this.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
Dogman stole our Valentine's Day dinner. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a true story for you about Valentine's Day and Dogman. I hope you use it on your Valentine's Day special, and please tell Madeline Starr that my wife and I say hello. This happened about 10 years back. I'm not a rich man, but I provide for my family. It was Valentine's Day Eve, and I was out hunting to find something that we could eat the next day. I wanted to have a feast to celebrate my love for my wife, and I was out looking for some big game. Well, I found it. Right there, walking into my crosshairs, was the biggest buck I'd ever seen. This must have had 30-point antlers. It was an old man of the mountain kind of a deer, and he didn't know it yet, but he was going to make for a happy Valentine's Day week for me and my wife. So I was looking through the scope, and I was about to squeeze off around, really excited at my extreme good luck, when suddenly a sort of a dark blur raced across what I was seeing in the scope, and suddenly the buck wasn't there anymore. I mean, it was just completely gone. I pulled back to look at the scene with my naked eyes, and I seen this thing. It was bigger than the buck itself, and it was just dragging the poor thing away. Somehow, he had ended its days already in the second or two I had been witnessing all this take place. How? I don't know, since I didn't see it directly. All I know is that the thing was bigger than any bear I'd ever seen, and it both looked and sounded like a dog, or at least its head looked like a dog's head. It had gray fur from top to bottom, at least as far as I could see, and it kept dragging and lifting and moving that buck until it was out of my sight. I felt really shaken up, as though I had seen a ghost. I felt just terrible. I don't know how to explain it other than that. I really wanted to cry, not just because of what had happened, losing the buck, but also because I had seen something that wasn't supposed to exist. I don't know why that made me sad. I guess maybe just because it forced me to accept that much of what we think is real is not, and much of what we call myth is very, very real. I guess it's just a matter of perspective. On some days, realizing that all you believed in is an illusion would feel freeing, but on that day, it made me want to weep. I went home to tell my wife what happened, and I was hoping she might console me a bit. Well, Elma didn't believe a word I said. She just called me a drunken old broke-ass fool. It wasn't my fault I was drunk. I had been drinking while hunting, that's all. What does she expect from a man? As for not having a lot of money, she knew that about me long before we got married. I felt sad, and then I got insulted on top of my sadness. Plus, we both had no meat to eat. That was the worst Valentine's Day of all time because Dogman stole our Valentine's Day dinner.
Happy birthday to me. A happy birthday to me.
The Dogman that almost took my cat from me. Dear Scary Stories NYC. This story happened the year after my wife passed on. My Valentine that year was a kitten that a good friend had given me. Actually, the kitten was about 8 or 9 months old by then and was nearly an adult. Let's call him OJ because he was orange all over. OJ got sick just before Valentine's Day and was throwing up a lot, refusing to eat anything. I made an appointment and had to drive him to the vet. It was a rainy day, and the way I took to get there took us through a heavily wooded area. The storm got going harder than anyone had predicted, and driving through the forest and all that wind was pretty frightening. The trees were swaying this way and that, and sure enough, one tree literally fell over onto the road, barely missing my car. I mean, we just missed getting smashed from above, probably by about a foot, no more. I thought I was going to have a heart attack, but that was nothing compared to what was going to happen next. Out in front of us, by about 100 or 120 feet on the road, from the right, a large, man-shaped being walked out onto the narrow tree-lined highway. There were 2 cars in front of me, one of which swerved left, the other of which swerved right. Both of them skidded off the road, and I found myself heading directly toward the figure now standing in front of me. As I approached, I could see that this was no ordinary man out there on the highway. It was some kind of hairy monster. The face resembled that of a mongrel more than anything else. It was a really ugly thing, just big and nasty looking and glaring at me and barking. Instead of moving out of my way, it kept moving back in front of wherever I drove, as though it wanted us to crash. I put my hand on the carrier holding my beloved sick kitten, and I prayed to be delivered from the mythic proportions of this bad storm. I looked out onto that road, and I knew what to do. Every movement came naturally and at the correct time. I swerved around the monster and drove onward. I had won. Then I noticed the car listing to the left. It was really dragging, not able to get up to full speed. Looking in my side view mirror, I noticed to my horror that the dog-headed monster was still holding on to my bumper, and it was trying to climb up onto my trunk. "Get off of my car, you monster!" I shouted as though I were at an exorcism or something, like I was trying to banish it. Well, that didn't work, as the creature was still making slow progress, climbing up onto the rear of my vehicle. I went into some wild stunt driving at that moment, swerving left and right as far as the width of the narrow highway would allow. No traffic was daring to come close behind me, so I had the road to myself to try to throw this thing off. Left, right, speeding up all the time. Still, the monster held on. I only had one more idea of what to do. I maxed out my speed, not going as fast as the car could manage, but as fast as I felt I could drive safely. And then, when I'd hit the fastest speed, I took my foot off the gas and I placed it down hard on the brake. We skidded and skidded for a really long time. Then I noticed that the Dogman had been thrown forward by our sudden deceleration. It was lying on the road in front of me. I was going to have to get around it one more time, and this time I couldn't allow it to grab hold of the bumper. Swerving literally off the road onto the grass, I sped around that Dogman and boogied on down to the vet's office. My cat was really sick, sicker than I could have known. He had to get all his really expensive stuff done to him, but we saved his life. Another hour or two might have been too late. It was that bad of a situation. If that Dogman had succeeded in making us crash, that cat would not have survived the day. Sometimes I wonder why things like Dogman exist. Why did it seem to want to bring misery into the world? Why did it seem to want to destroy my innocent cat's life? I wonder why such malevolence exists in the world. Then, I look at my kitty, and I guess it's just because of yin and yang. For every sweet and kind, wonderful little friend you make, you're going to find at least one other total effing bastard. Just like the Dogman that almost took my cat from me.
Brr. They're just getting creepier and creepier. Our next and final tale features a guest appearance from a very close friend of mine, and that story is called
The Mocking Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, this is a story that happened to me when I was a younger man. It took place around 23 years ago, but really the story began 20 years before that, when I married and bought my first home. It was a lovely house at the edge of a remarkably beautiful old-growth forest. My young wife would always walk in the woods every single day. On her way back, she would cry out, "Yoo-hoo," to let me know she was coming back. We didn't have cell phones in those days. We just made up our own ways to communicate. For my lovely wife, Sarah, that meant crying out, "Yoo-hoo," when she was coming close to making her grand entrance. It's one of the things about her that is most painful to think about, and one of the things I have to say I miss the most, hearing her beautiful voice and knowing that she would be home soon. Sarah went for a walk in those woods one day, and she never returned. Searchers went looking for her, but soon a bad snowstorm hit the area, and she was never recovered. That was 43 years ago, and still to this day, they found no sign or clue of what might have happened to her. I was broken by this. I moved from that area. I became a kind of a hermit for years, and I'm still not really back to normal even though I'm past middle age already. You're supposed to gain wisdom when you get old. If so, I'm still waiting for mine to arrive in the snail mail with my next Social Security check. When I moved out of that area, I sold my home to a friend of the family. When the 20th anniversary of my wife's disappearance came around, he and I got to talking, and he agreed to allow me to stay in his home for the anniversary weekend. He took his family on a vacation at my expense, and I had the place for 2.5 days to myself to reminisce and try to put my head back in order. And so, I sat on the back porch of the home I once had shared with my wife. I spoke to her as though she could hear me. I told her I was there to apologize to her. I was sorry that I hadn't been there to protect her from whatever had happened. I also apologized because I wanted to ask her if I might be allowed to leave her in the past and to move forward. I wanted to have a chance for a more normal life, but the guilt was preventing me from doing so. I felt like Sarah hadn't been allowed to grow old, so why should I? I needed to move on. I needed to have a new life without her, and I wanted to ask her please to let me have this. And then, as if in answer, from the forest came a very haunting sound. Was that my wife's voice? It sounded very far away, maybe distorted somehow. I left the porch and walked toward the woods. I grew angry. Someone was playing some kind of a sick joke. I tried to imagine who it might be. Someone from back then who was jealous of us. Someone who would think it was funny to torment me that way. I marched harder into the forest. I wanted to find the source of that sound. I imagined I would find a tape recorder. It was closer now, getting closer and closer. It certainly did sound like Sarah. How amazing it would be to turn a corner and see her. Imagine if she had been in this forest all these 20 years. Imagine if she was there now waiting for me. I was almost there. The voice sounded so close. It was to my right. I tore through some bushes. I jumped over a boulder. I swung around a tree, and there I saw the chest of a hairy man. I looked up and saw the head, but it was not a human head. I backed away, not understanding what was happening. I saw no tape recorder. I saw an animal-like man thing instead, towering over me and drooling wherever it stood. This giant beast couldn't be the source of the sound. I was wrong. This was the source of the voice I had been chasing. My mind spun in circles as I ran away in horror, fear, and anger. I was angry because my wife and I had been apparently written in as expendable characters in some sort of a modern Lovecraft drama, and that wasn't fair. I could barely see through my tears as I ran and stumbled away from the living horror that tormented me. The beast chased me home, crying out in its mockery of my late wife's voice. I entered the house and locked the door behind me. All night, from outside, the Dogman thing mocked me, calling out like my wife until I fell asleep crying. In the morning, I left. I had not reached any closure at all. I had only deepened the nightmare. I know it sounds crazy, but that thing is the reason my wife went missing. Whatever happened to her, it was because of that mocking dog-headed thing. What is it? It can't be an animal in the true sense. It must be a sorcerer or brujo, or maybe a demonic or negative nature spirit. I don't know what the thing was, but I do know I never remarried. I never came out of my social coma, and I never have returned to normal. And it's all because of the mocking Dogman.
Wow. That was creepy. I especially liked the girl who did the yoo-hoo part. I think she deserves some kind of internet award.
Me too. You were great, Madeline. Happy birthday, Madeline.
Oh, thank you. Well, as you can see, Bigfoot and Henry have come to rescue me from Dogman Swamp.
That's right, yo.
Unfortunately, that means it's the end of our special.
Oh no, is it over already?
Oh, don't cry, Henry.
But I just got here.
Thank you all for being my special Valentines, and I hope to see you all again soon. Bye for now.
See you soon. See you next episode.
Can we please get out of this swamp now, boys? I need to go somewhere to pull these leeches off of me.
I can help. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
If you enjoyed this, please click like or consider subscribing. Remember to click the bell icon or you won't get notifications. If you want to listen to Bigfoot's secret uncensored story each Sunday, just go to peterbernard.com and become a paid subscriber. See you tomorrow. Same dog time, same dog channel.
Come back for more scary stories.